Welcome back to The Explainer, where we take complex, high-stakes events and break them down so you can understand exactly what is going on behind the headlines. Today, we are looking at an absolute clash of the titans. We're talking about a monumental legal collision happening right now at the London High Court between two massive giants of the fast fashion world, Shein and Temu. Honestly, this isn't just some minor squabble over a t-shirt design. No, this is a massive, multi-layered strategic war with global e-commerce dominance literally on the line. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today's breakdown. First, we'll set the stage with the fast fashion courtroom clash. Then, we'll look at the specific copyright accusation, followed by Temu's pretty surprising strategic counterattack. After that, we'll zoom out to the global litigation war, and finally, we'll tie it all back to the massive money involved with IPOs and regulatory heat. All right, part one, the fast fashion courtroom clash. So picture this. We're setting the scene in the UK, specifically at the Business and Property Courts over in London. Today, May 11th, 2026, marks the opening of a totally high-stakes, two-week evidence trial. On one side of the aisle, you have the plaintiff, Shein, and they are alleging massive copyright theft. On the opposing side stands the defendant, Temu, and they're firing back with claims of anti-competitive practices. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that both of these are Chinese-founded platforms that have completely disrupted the global retail market over the last few years. I mean, they are fighting tooth and nail for market dominance, and this courtroom in London, it's just the latest battleground. My job today is to walk you through exactly what both sides are claiming, completely neutrally, because, honestly, the legal arguments here are just fascinating. Moving on to part two, the copyright accusation. Shein's opening salvo focuses entirely on a staggering number: 2,300. They formally claim that Temu systematically scraped around 2,300 specific product photographs. And we're talking about images that were created, styled, and shot by Shein's own employees. Shein says Temu took these and used them directly on their own website to advertise lookalike clothing. So Shein is arguing this wasn't just some accidental copy-paste job by a rogue employee. They are arguing it was a systematic, massive scraping of their proprietary visual property on a truly industrial scale. And this quote brilliantly illustrates exactly why Shein is being so aggressive here. Listen to how Shein's barrister, Bennett Brandreth, stated it in court. He said, "This was an attempt to steal a march on an existing participant in the market, and Temu has sought to obtain, we say, an unfair advantage." You see, Shein's core commercial argument is that by allegedly copying these 2,300 images, Temu was able to publish complete professional product pages way faster and at a drastically lower cost than they ever could have managed on their own. At the end of the day, it's about speed and cost efficiency in a market where every single second and every single penny counts. Which brings us to part three, Temu's strategic counterattack. Now, what's really wild is this massive legal pivot we're seeing. Temu has effectively abandoned its defense of those 2,300 disputed images. Yeah, you heard that right. Instead of fighting it picture by picture, they're leaving it up to the court to essentially just figure out the damages and injunctive relief, which are just the legal orders compelling them to stop using the photos. Meanwhile, Temu is throwing their entire legal weight behind a massive counterattack aimed straight at the heart of Shein's actual business model. They are alleging anti-competitive practices. So what's the accusation? Temu is accusing Shein of creating exclusive supplier arrangements. What does that actually mean in plain English? Well, they allege Shein deliberately locks manufacturing workshops into exclusive agreements that literally prevent those exact same workshops from selling their goods to competing platforms. Platforms like, you guessed it, Temu. So Temu is formally asking the UK court to consider whether these supplier lock-ins actually constitute an illegal restraint of trade under UK law, and further, whether the court should force those agreements to be completely unwound. It's a remarkably bold move. Absorb the copyright blow, but try to legally dismantle your rival's entire supply chain. All right, part four, a global litigation war. Now, this two-week trial in London is incredibly important, but we have to remember it is ultimately just one single battlefront in a massive worldwide conflict between these two e-commerce superpowers. Just look across the globe. In the UK, completely separate from this specific court case, the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, has been actively investigating both Shein and Temu on consumer protection and pricing transparency grounds since 2024. Then you head over to the EU and Singapore, where there are ongoing multi-jurisdictional lawsuits where these two platforms have just continuously sued each other. And then we look at the US, where shifting regulatory sands are basically changing the game entirely. Let's drill down into that US regulatory pressure for a second because it is absolutely vital context. Back in February 2025, the Trump administration moved to close the U.S. de minimis exemption. Think of this as a massive loophole that previously allowed companies to ship cheap goods directly to American consumers completely tax-free. Because this specific exemption had been completely central to both companies' massive growth models in the States, closing it has just skyrocketed the financial pressure on both Shein and Temu. It essentially makes their fight for global market share even more desperate and, frankly, a lot more aggressive.
And finally, Part 5, IPOs and Regulatory Heat.
We need to connect this really complex legal and regulatory battle to the ultimate prize, because at the end of the day, this is about massive financial stakes. Temu is backed by its parent company, PDD Holdings, which is already publicly listed on the NASDAQ, so they have their stable public footing. Shein, on the other hand, is currently preparing for a massive public listing of their own, but they've been facing intense regulatory pressure. Their intended venue for this IPO has actually been forced to bounce between Hong Kong and London. In fact, right now in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, is separately reviewing Shein's IPO disclosures. You can absolutely bet that bankers and investors are watching this London High Court trial like hawks, knowing full well that a ruling on copyright theft or anti-competitive supply chains could heavily impact Shein's looming IPO.
So what should we be watching for next? Let's trace out this timeline. Right now, as we sit here in May 2026, the 2-week evidence trial is fully underway in London. But don't expect instant answers. The absolute earliest expected ruling from the judge on this deeply complex case won't arrive until late summer 2026. And hovering over all of this in the near future is that huge looming Shein IPO process, which is going to be heavily influenced by how all these legal chips fall across the UK, the US, and the EU.
So I want to leave you with a provocative question to consider. With lawsuits flying over copyright, aggressive counterclaims attempting to tear up exclusive supply chains, and regulators in Washington, Brussels, and London all simultaneously turning up the heat, how will these fierce legal and regulatory battles ultimately reshape the fast fashion landscape that we interact with every single day? Are costs going to go up? Will these platforms be forced to fundamentally change how they operate? It's a truly fascinating space to watch, and we'll keep tracking the data and the court documents as they drop. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.